This is an opportunity for us to talk this afternoon with Pamela Van Hine, who has certainly been the leader in the college's library and library-based educational programs over a time that dates back to October 1976, a time now that's verging in on 30 years. Pam, thank you for being here with us today.
I am honored to be doing this. Thank you very much.
This being 1976, of course, you came to the college when we were in Chicago. Tell me how that happened.
Well, after I went to college, I went to library school at the University of Chicago, and I ended up marrying my college sweetheart, who was going to dental school at the University of Pennsylvania. So rather than finishing library school at the time, I moved to Philadelphia, and I applied for something like 80 different jobs. The most interesting one was at Burpee Seeds. I knew from the 10th grade that I wanted to be a biomedical librarian, and I didn't really think of that as medical. I was thinking that more as biology, so I thought Burpee Seeds actually would be a good place to work. But they interviewed me, and the interview was writing abstracts of seeds, and I couldn't do it. So I obviously didn't get that job. But one of my husband's and my good friends from college was working at the University of Pennsylvania. He was going to medical school. He was going to be an OBGYN, and he had a summer job at the Department of OBGYN, and he got me an interview there, and that was my entry into OBGYN, working for the most marvelous people in the world, the University of Pennsylvania, Luigi Mastriani and Celso Garcia, and of course Mike Minuti and Dick Schwartz and all these people
who are with us this very day.
Yeah, right, and have gone on to great things, including Jerry Strauss, who is one of the speakers today. And I knew him while he was working on his PhD, MD program, and his lab was like right around the corner from me. But I was there for 5 years until
This was about 30 years ago.
This is 35 years ago,
35 years
right?
ago.
And my husband finished his dental degree, and he did an oral medicine program, and it was time to move back to Chicago. So we moved back to Chicago, and I loved working in OBGYN, so I applied for a job with Dr. Shera and Dr. Will Banks and at the University of Chicago. And I was late for my interview with Dr. Shera. I was so embarrassed. So he didn't hire me, and none of them hired me. I applied for something at G.D. Searle. They have a very nice library. And they did interview me. They didn't hire me. So I figured, okay, I'll go back and finish my long-lost thesis and get my master's. I had written to ACOG that the library at Penn had an EMOG, the Educational Resources and OBGYN catalog. I saw Edris Hoover's name there, so I didn't know if that was a man or a woman, but I wrote to Edris Hoover and asked if they had a job. Never heard back, so I went into ACOG to work on my master's degree.
What year would that have been?
This was 76.
That was
this was
76.
fall of 76.
Okay.
And she interviewed me on the spot because they were going to be having an opening, but they didn't hire me, so I still stayed home. And I wasn't expecting to be interviewed. I mean, I was dressed to go in to do research. So I was still kind of looking like my hippie days with long hair and not appropriate interview clothes. And I think they really weren't too excited. Meanwhile, I went back to Penn that summer because they were sponsoring the Society of Reproductive Biology meeting. They were hosting it, and I had done a lot of the background work for it. So they asked me to come back and do it. So while I was there, my girlfriend turned me into a professional. She got my hair cut and got me to dress right. So when I went back to ACOG, I looked like somebody they might want to hire. So they hired me.
What year are we in now?
So we're still in 76.
Still in 76, all right. A faithful year.
They're
for
faithful,
you.
and that was how I ended up starting at ACOG as the reference librarian.
And this, of course, was in Chicago.
This was in Chicago. Yeah. We lived in Wrigley Field. literally around the block. Yeah, we could hear it and smell it, and it was great. Wonderful
Catch
neighborhood.
baseballs when they hit them over the fence,
Well,
right?
not quite that close, but
Oh,
pretty
not
close.
that close. All right. Obviously, it wasn't too long after that that the college came to Washington.
A few years,
What,
right. 81.
yeah, what convinced you to move with us?
At that time, I got divorced, I think the following year. And actually, we used to interview the new staff.
True.
And you predicted that I was going to be at ACOG for 2 years, and then I would go off with my husband and have babies in Munster, Indiana. And I got divorced instead. And there was absolutely no reason for me not to move to Washington. And as you may remember, at that time they were splitting the department into 2 departments.
Yes.
And Edris Hoover was staying with these new educational products we were developing. And I was going to stay with the library, so it was a promotion for me, a very nice promotion. So,
What year then did you come to Washington with us?
I guess 81 is when we
81,
moved. Yeah,
mhm.
right. Shared a house with Jack Edwards, which was quite an experience. Bless his soul.
As a few years went on after that, Dr. Jacobs came, J. Bay Jacobs came to
Yes.
visit us one day.
Right.
Do you remember that at all?
I remember
I do. I bet
I
you do
remember
too.
it some. Yes, he was quite a character, but we were grateful for his ideas and his funding. And even more than his coming to the office, I remember going to his house and being absolutely amazed.
I remember his house well. Tell us about it.
Books everywhere, all kinds of things, photographs of his lions, and very exotic, strange, heavy furniture, and everything be very dark and dusty, but amazing books, most of which I guess we ended up with.
Close to 5 acres, overlooking the river.
Right, it was
right
a castle,
across from
absolute
Georgetown.
castle.
It was just an
Yeah.
unbelievable place
Right.
to see, and really, even for those days, quite isolated.
Oh, yeah. Not on the subway.
Sat there, not on the subway. And he filed stuff on the stairway, as I remember. It just
Yes. of
papers
course.
and books were everywhere.
Right. Of course. Sometimes we do that at home too, so I can't hold that against him.
What remind us all what then, because he was interested in giving us at least some funding for having a history library or a library with more emphasis on history, what became then in our old Washington building?
Well, he, I guess, proposed it mainly to you, and you proposed it to me, and I put it in this 5-year plan that I found the other day when I was looking. It was on blue paper. And I gave it to Dr. Vischer and gave it to you. And that was part of the proposal, was to develop this self-sustaining and premier library in the history of OBGYN in the United States, focusing on American OBGYN. And our goal was to collect, we started by just deciding we wanted all the first editions of all the major American textbooks, which we thought was going to be a fairly small collection. We had no idea how it was going to grow and how the idea would expand and how you couldn't limit it to just American books because the early Americans were using European books. So we have a lot of European books now. And when we set up the whole program, we decided that it would have all these other components to encourage the use, including this oral history program, which I don't know if that was literally one of our ideas or Justin McCarthy's idea. But he was certainly a critical part to developing that and supporting that. When we first did them, and he was with Wyeth for many years, they had a videotaping program in the Wyeth booth, and we used to do the oral history programs when the exhibit closed down for the day. And we did that for several years until they didn't do that anymore, and then we had to get separate people to do that. But he was always very interested in that, supporting that.
Well, and of course, as time passed, Dr. Jacobs, rest his soul, went on to another place, and while he would have, as you know, would have liked his funds used to convert his house into something out overlooking the river, the geography was such that just never would have worked. And
No.
in addition to which, of course, it was an enormously valuable piece of real estate. And so when we moved to our new building, things happened.
Big time.
What all happened?
We were involved in designing the new space, and Margaret was very, very involved in developing the new space. When we first started in the 600 Maryland, the history library was barely in one small office, and we had bookshelves on one wall, and we had a display case that was actually out in the Resource Center, and not much room for more than that.
Yeah, and you were in much smaller,
smaller
space.
Yes, the whole
time,
library
yes.
was much smaller then. But when we moved to our current space at 12th and Maryland, it enabled us to build this beautiful space up on the 6th floor. So it had great visibility. It was right around the corner when people walked in. Gorgeous bookshelves, special display cases and desks, and I really, really got a chance to expand the collection.
And then all of a sudden you moved.
Yes.
In the building.
Yes. Yeah, well. Yes.
Not all of a sudden.
No, actually, many years later. Dr. Hale came into my office once when I was still the director, asking if I'd be willing to move down to the basement. And for more space, and I said, for more space, I'll go anywhere. And we went down to look at the space, and it was this whole little warren of offices that were just really not appetizing, but the architects said that they could build us something beautiful. And they worked very, very closely with us. They listened to exactly what we wanted. We did a survey of the ACOG staff, asking them what they wanted in the library. We did a survey, of course, the library staff. We worked with the architects, and they just created this amazing space. It's just gorgeous. It's a real showcase. And, I'm very proud that we did that and were involved with it. So it's actually just the third time I developed the library.
Not only is your space good, but your staff are, at least that you hired at the start, are wonder workers.
Well, they're not my staff anymore, but they're still wonderful. And some of them have been not as long as I have, but Kim and Sandy have been with the college for 20 years this fall. They were among the initial people that were hired when we moved. And I think Mary Glass has been there like 15 years, and Mary Hyde's been there 10 years. And the newbies have still been there several years.
Very
we're
long-lasting staff, which of course adds greatly to what they can do.
And knowledge is everything when you work in a library.
Although we can't obviously get into great detail, what about the space set aside for historic collections?
It is fantastic, and that was one of the, we are eternally grateful to Dr. Hale for almost, not giving us quite a blank check, but be willing to spend the money to develop the space the way it should be developed. And we have 4 different environmental zones, specially controlled with the right temperature and humidity depending upon the activity that goes on with it. And of course the coldest one we call the refrigerator, which is where the rare books and the old books live, and it is cold in there and a little bit drier in there. And where most of the staff sit, it's kind of a normal environment. And we have another enclosed space with compact shelving that is somewhere in between. It's a bit cooler, and it's very temperature controlled. So
Can you tell us something about the volume of work that your staff accomplishes in that? I'm not talking about necessarily just the historical collection, but in the entire service area.
The number that we tend to give out is about 100,000 requests a year. We think that we're one of the...
I'll repeat 100,000
100,000,
requests a
yes.
year.
Most of which used to come in by telephone and letter, and now the vast majority come in by email, which we love. You can do it when you're convenient. You can batch process stuff. You can develop little automatic responses. It's so much more efficient. And an automatic record, play telephone tag and, miscommunicate. What did you really say? What was that again? So email is great.
How large is your staff now?
They're not my staff.
All right. How large is the staff?
The staff in the
encouraged by
Resource
you?
Center. I'm a part-time librarian, and then we have 4 full-time librarians and 2.5 support staff, which is about what we had.
Can you tell me anything about workload? I mean, just reflecting on how many staff there are, I guess, reflects on the workload, but do you have counts on the number of contacts or pieces of paper you send out?
We actually stopped keeping real track of stuff, although actually we started it again. It's more the quality of the type of things that we do. We do really intense research for staff, and once ACOG got into the evidence-based documents, sometimes 3 of us will spend like a week just working on one search for that. It's got like 70 different separate searches that go with it. So in the history library, it's all the stuff that goes with the different historical activities and all these miscellaneous strange questions we get on the history of that, or what is this and what is that? Some of which we can answer very quickly, some of which could take us days to do. How
large is your staff now?
There's,
realizing that they're not all full-time.
Yeah, it's 4 librarians and me as a half-time librarian and 2.5 support staff, and we keep very busy. And one of the reasons why I went part-time was they cut the half-time position, and I couldn't get it back no matter what I did. So I thought about it. I really, really wanted to stay with ACOG. I love being with ACOG. It's the perfect job for me. And I thought about it. I convinced Mary Hyde that she was ready to be director, and that we would kind of switch things, and that then we could hire the full-time person, and I could be the half-time missing person, and it would cost ACOG less money. So I proposed that to Elsa, and it went through. So for 4 years I've not been director, and it's great.
What's your, I think you've explained almost everything. What's your major audience? Where does most of your quote-unquote business come from?
Staff and members, probably the most intense work we do. We still do a lot of things for consumers, and that used to be the biggest category was consumers. And that's always been really important to ACOG.
Are the consumers asking for fixed documents, or are they asking that you research some? My doctor told me I needed to do X.
Well, we're not going to do a huge amount of research for consumers. We'll tell them how to do things. We'll send them our pamphlets. We've got lots of form letters for them, and they contact this society for that and that. And we'll send them our pamphlets, send them some of our guidelines. But say, you can do your own Medline searches now. And do some things. But for physicians, of course, we do much more intense research and send them our guidelines. And of course, then there's lawyers. We do a lot of business for lawyers, unfortunately.
Do they pay?
Yes, they pay.
They pay.
Yes, we charge them an outrageous amount of money for our withdrawn documents.
I'm partly glad to hear that.
Yes. Even though I'm married to one now, he's a good guy.
Any things that, in looking back, that you see as the key moments that changed everything? Or I think you may have already explained it, but how does it appear when you close your eyes and think about it?
Right. Well, what you didn't ask me about was the IAMS project, which was one of the projects that I was most proud of.
And that's good to talk about.
Yes. It was a program from the National Library of Medicine, which I think is now gone. It's Integrated Academic Information Management Systems. And it was a proposal from Nina Matheson, a very famous medical librarian. And she did a draft report with the AAMC. And one of the things that you were very good about was when pieces of paper would go across your desk, you would make sure it got to the right person. So you gave it to me.
You were the right person.
And I read it, and I was so excited. I said, this is what I want to do with the Resource Center. This is what ACOG should be doing. There is a role for ACOG to be playing in this. And we explored doing this, and you went with me to the National Library of Medicine for the seminar, and you know Dick West very well. And I have to tell you a tiny story about Dick West. I went to library school on a National Library of Medicine training fellowship back at a time in the late 60s when they needed medical librarians, and the person who was responsible for that program was Dick West. And at the end of the program, they brought us to the National Library of Medicine, and we got to meet him. And I remember that. But he, among his career, worked for the American Psychological Association, so he understood the role that societies play, and he encouraged us to get the grant, and we got the grant. And we were the only national society to ever
Really?
get an IAMS
I
grant.
didn't know that.
Oh yeah, we're the only one to get the model phase or the planning phase, and it was fantastic
Is it still
activity.
operating?
Their program is gone, and of course we no longer have funding
Yeah,
from them.
sure.
But we did good
But
things
you,
with it.
you
yeah.
launched it.
We
birthed
launched it. We all did it. It was a marvelous activity.
Any closing word you'd like to set forth about what's happened over the past 20 years or so?
Well, we love to encourage people to use the Resource Center. We are very happy to be part of the college. We think we're a very important department in the college. That we're the main way that people find out about what ACOG's all about. We disseminate to everyone. And we're the main way, one of the main ways that ACOG hears what's going on out in the world. We get questions from everybody. If ACOG isn't addressing it, we bring it to the committees and say, hey, this is a problem, you need to deal with it. So it's great. I'm very happy to be here and happy to be interviewed. Thank you very much.
I said I obviously haven't seen what all the other organizations in this country or overseas are doing. I think for a time our main competitor would have been the Royal College in London. I think we've outdistanced them completely in terms of what we do and what we have.
Right. And that's very interesting that both of us have very nice libraries. Most societies do not. It's very labor intensive, it's very expensive. And you know, it's marvelous that ACOG and the Royal College have libraries and appreciate them.
And of course, to say the obvious, it's not the fact that we have a library, it's the fact that the library serves beautifully.
That's what we try to do. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been an honor doing it.
Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.